I think that it's pretty fair for me to say within recent history, science and spirituality have sort of fallen into an antagonistic relationship. You could even argue that the Jungian archetype of the warring brothers is at play here. And there is a word, a very controversial word, that both unites and divides the two. I don't know if any of you have ever gotten into conflict with your siblings, but your parents still force both of you to sit at the table together. This word is that table, and the word is vibration. When all is said and done, vibration sits as the linchpin. It appears to be the very foundation of everything that we've come to know and understand. As a matter of fact, what we term as understanding is just the various faces of vibration. You can just think of these faces as different categories of knowledge itself. To name them, there is information, cycles, patterns, frequency, relationships, connections. I talk about all of these all the time on this channel, and I encourage you to visit some of my older videos. I really won't stress them too much in this one. But this is the basic anatomy of understanding, at the very least, the kind of understanding that we possess. I'm sure most of you have already heard of dualism. It's pretty cliche by now. We figured out many moons ago that this is how our perspective operates, but it's more than just our individual perspective. We have discovered via physics that reality itself appears to be held in place by what they call symmetry. Whether it be mystical insight or the scientific method, they both appear to dance around this same unifying principle of some kind of polarity. This principle appears to be the thing that is facilitating reality. But what in the world is it? Why is it this way exactly? After years of investigating this, everything that I hoped wasn't true is becoming more and more plausible by the day. And if there's anything I can tell you, it is this. There are all kinds of strange forces at work, forces that you don't learn about in science class. And speaking of forces, I think that this is a good place to start. This way of being, this polarity, I think that it is the result or the product of some kind of force. And I call this force memory. And I'm not the first person to come to this conclusion, quite far from it actually. We can see the notion of a force being responsible for reality quite clearly within Taoism. This is what the Tao is, and it heavily inspired the concept of the force from Star Wars, but I digress. And this isn't about being all woo-woo. You know, Taoism sort of has this reputation for being all woo-woo and mystical. This force is very real in the same way that gravity is. As a matter of fact, I compared it to gravity in my previous video and the way that it operates. But before we get to that, we have to quickly cover something very basic that most people tend to not think about. And this is forces themselves. What are they? What exactly is a force? Well, no one really knows. Forces are described as being fundamental, and this word fundamental is just a nerdy way of saying we don't have the ability to understand that. They are self-evident. They just are. For the most part, we can see how these forces operate. We can see what they do, but what they are in and of themselves is completely mysterious. Nature operates in a very particular manner, and by investigating this particularity, we can see that there are these shadowy figures behind the scenes that serve as the mechanism of action for everything in the universe. And these forces are patterns. They are expressed as these consistent patterns, and we are able to conceptualize these patterns and oftentimes even see them via abstraction. We accomplish this through fields. Fields are pretty weird. They are like these abstract maps. They are representations of a dynamic. of some kind of potential interplay, of a cosmic presence or tension. And with all of that in mind, there is a force acting upon us, and I call this force memory. And what this force appears to do is decompress data. For us, vibration is the very essence of reality. It is things happening. It is events occurring, the sequence of events. It is the ability to witness, explain, and know. It is language. It is the let there be light at the beginning of Scripture. But in actuality, there is one super event that is being decompressed. And this decompression is being facilitated by a force that I call memory. I know that this all sounds a tad bit schizo and out there, but a simple example would be something like this. You can imagine that you have a music album that is on some kind of disc. The entirety of that album is all there on the disc. It is all there all at once, suspended in some kind of superposition. But if you actually want to experience the music, you have to put it on the record player and press play. And when you do this, things start happening. It begins to cycle. There is this constant looping over and over. And this cycling is what is facilitating the music being played. And this cycling is what I call memory. And you'll see that the actual act of listening to the music is something akin to decompressing the data. The album goes from being suspended in this sort of superposition-like state, and it becomes localized to a specific state, a specific time. And this is just an analogy, but I think that it's a pretty useful one. And if you found yourself here on my channel and you're still listening to this video, then you can probably clearly see the skeletal framework of the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics with the collapse of the wave function. And I don't know how to tell you this, but the many worlds hypothesis is really just a scientific rehashing of something that we have known about for thousands of years. If you want to say that God is a white bearded man out in some heavenly plane or a giant supercomputer in hyperspace, everyone who sits down and seriously tries to analyze the metaphysics of how reality operates, of what reality is, they all come to this same conclusion. It is always the same basic structure or archetype if you want to view it from a more Jungian perspective, and it is ultimately just a preference of aesthetics which determines the way that you choose to view it. Obviously, in this modern information age, we view everything through this cybernetic lens. But it's important to realize that we're not talking about anything different from our ancient ancestors. People in ancient history view things through the dominant aesthetics of that time. And when you look at something like the many worlds hypothesis, which claims there are all of these endlessly branching timelines that are determined by these quantum events like the collapse of the wave function, whenever you trace this timeline back, whenever you zoom out far enough, you see that it is ultimately some kind of single quantum object, a singularity, a super event, or super data that is being decompressed into discrete instances. You can easily swap out this singularity with some kind of supercomputer in simulation theory that is simulating all possible possibilities for some unknown reason. But if you simply look at the world's oldest religion, Hinduism, and its close cousin Buddhism, you could replace this singularity or this supercomputer with the god Yama, which presides over this thing that we are in or this plane that we exist in called samsara. The word samsara means cycles or going in circles. It is, in essence, this force that I call memory. Or if you don't like that aesthetic, you can look at Gnosticism and Neoplatonism and replace Yama or this supercomputer with the demiurge Yaldabaoth, which is the god that supposedly has us all trapped within fate. But what is fate exactly? Fate is the sequencing of events. It is connections, relationships, patterns, information, or cycles. The concept that we most commonly associate with fate is time passing. It is the tick-tock of the clock. And one thing that all of these models share in common is the inability to escape. We are supposedly trapped within fate. We are supposedly trapped within samsara. All explanations that I've seen of simulation theory seem to suggest that we are trapped inside of the simulation or the matrix or however you want to put it. We are trapped inside of all of these varying timelines. Within the whole many worlds interpretation, there is a concept that was gaining some popularity called quantum immortality. And I was talking with one of my supporters on Locals. I recommend that you all go and support me on Locals. We're going to throw a party over there. But he was pretty much saying that quantum immortality is reincarnation. They are one and the same. All of these systems present a very similar scenario that occurs at the quote-unquote end of life. With quantum immortality, you are transported to some alternate timeline where you continue to live, where you still live on. Within Gnosticism, you are placed on trial by the demiurge, and if you don't pass, you are thrust back down into fate. Within Hinduism, you are recycled back into samsara. Or if you want to be more practical about all of this and just say that energy is conserved in accordance with the laws of physics, it all circles back to this cycling, to this vibration, this polarity. This is samsara. This is the Tao. This is what I call memory, and I think that there is some kind of force associated with it. And I believe that understanding this force is the most crucial aspect of the human experience. It appears to be the entire reason why we evolved through the primate species. It seems that we have evolved in a special way to where we are able to feel this force acting upon us. It is behind our intuition that there is some kind of overarching process that is unfolding. It is why we are able to ask why. It is why philosophy is the oldest discipline. Somewhere along the line, thought and reason began to emerge amongst the monkeys, and the very first product of this phenomenon was the realization of this force. And as I mentioned, it's very similar to gravity in its mechanism of action in the sense that it is a pulling force, the same way that gravity keeps your physical body attached to the planet. This force keeps your psyche or your consciousness embedded within reality. This is why I call it memory, because this is quite literally the function that memory serves. It is where reality is stored for us in our brains. It is what anchors us to reality. I use the example of someone who has Alzheimer's disease all of the time, that without memory, you would just float away. And once again, I am sort of speaking in metaphor here, but I do believe that this principle is literally manifested within nature. This is what nature is. Chemistry, DNA, microbiology, culture, cities, planets, stars, solar systems. It is all memory. It is all this cycling. But the weird thing is, if you look at gravity, for example, it is a pulling or attracting force, and the attractor is mass. We already know about mass. It has this weird property where it influences other mass to come towards it, and we call this gravity. However, the attractor for this force that I'm referring to is completely mysterious. I talk about strange attractors often in many of my previous videos. Within chaos theory, strange attractors are these weird mathematical objects or this odd principle that generates all possible possibilities around them. You could say that they generate all possible interactions or something like that. But whenever you try to model this, it presents as some kind of fractalesque image. There is some kind of fractal phase space or dimension that you are encountering. And if an electromagnetic field looks like this, and a gravitational field looks like this, then this memory field would look something like this. It would be this weird fractalesque recursive type of situation going on. This is the alien supercomputer in hyperspace running a recursive algorithm in order to decompress some kind of super data set. This is all timelines. It is all possible possibilities. It is the Tao. It is samsara and reincarnation, the inability to be lost. It is pure memory. Now, do I think that we literally live inside of a Mandelbrot set? I mean, come on, you have to give me more credit than that. Fractals are just a way of conceptualizing infinity. I believe that that is a direct quote from Mandelbrot himself. This thing that we are in is what we call eternity. It is what we experience as time passing or things happening. It is the ability to witness, explain, and to know. It is knowledge. I talked about this in my previous video with hyperbolic space, hyperbolic geometry, that we are somehow inside of knowledge. I like to use the word consciousness because it really encapsulates everything that I'm trying to express. When I say knowledge, I don't mean y equals mx plus b. I mean the ability to understand, the ability to experience meaning. I said in my previous video that we are inside of some kind of meaning machine. All of this is meaning. The things that we coldly refer to as matter are actually some kind of meaning. The tree that's growing right outside of your apartment is just as sacred as the thoughts inside of your head. This is where the paradox lies, and your ability to integrate this paradox into your perspective is the key to you understanding what's going on here. But it's like a Chinese finger trap. If you just try to force and pry it open, it will continue to not make sense. You will be lost in samsara, going around in circles. And we have all heard this expressed so many times that it has become cliche, but some kind of way the outside world is our inner world. Outer space is inner space. We are inside of the outside, and not in some psychological way. I'm not trying to psychologize it. It isn't that reality is some kind of Rorschach reflecting back at you how you feel on the inside. No, I mean it in a very real way. Reality is a living metaphor, some kind of living symbol. It is representative of some kind of higher principle. You could say that it is a lower dimensional slice of some higher dimensional object or something like that, which is really just a modern way of saying as above, so below. Everything that we consider to be reality, these processes that we view unfolding, are some kind of representation of what's occurring somewhere else. It is like if you read the book versus watching the movie, it is the same story, but they are able to incorporate different types of information. And the evidence of this can be clearly seen whenever you examine the relationship between science and spirituality. You don't think that it's a bit odd that science continually confirms many of our ancient intuitions, our spiritual hypotheses? You mean to tell me that you don't raise a single eyebrow at the fact that thousands of years ago, you can take Plato for simplicity's sake, that all of these years ago, before the invention of the telescope, simply by sitting down and thinking, someone can come to the conclusion that reality emerges from some kind of single incomprehensible point. And for us, thousands of years later, to confirm it essentially with science, you don't find that to be suspicious? You think it's just some kind of lucky guess? To call it a coincidence is nothing short of cope. You don't have to be special. Anyone who in good faith sits down and tries to detangle all of this will come to this conclusion. It's the same way that if you throw a piece of iron shaving inside of a magnetic field, its behavior will ultimately fall in congruence with the field that it is within. The same principle applies to us. Our thinking naturally falls into congruence within this field of consciousness, this memory field, however you want to phrase it. I use this word spirituality sort of as an umbrella term. It includes philosophy because philosophy used to be nearly indistinguishable from theology. Philosophy, theology, metaphysics, mysticism, I consider it all to be spirituality. And spirituality and science have this strange quarrel going on. It is like this weird Jungian anima-animus complex that is playing out, or this left brain, right brain, bicameral mind type of situation that's going on. Science often scolds spirituality for being completely lacking in evidence when they fail to realize that they are the evidence. They are two wings on the same bird. Science is spirituality with attention to a different set of details. And with all of that groundwork laid, we have finally reached the grand finale, the most important part of this video. You see, science confirms our spiritual hunches about the beginning, but they also confirm our spiritual revelations about the end. It's as I mentioned. Everything that I hoped wasn't true is actually turning out to be so. From the scientific perspective, the story of the universe is the adventure of going from the state of lowest entropy into highest entropy. From the perspective of metaphysics, it is the adventure of complete order turning into total chaos. And it is here where the weird paradox lies that we are caught inside of. Order and chaos have this strange paradoxical relationship that is impossible for us to detangle. It's as I mentioned, we are inside of the outside. I always say in my videos that consciousness is ultimately turning inside out. If reality is some kind of living metaphor, then what lies at the end is a pun, some kind of punchline. And it all goes a little something like this. Time and information have this inverse relationship. If you have maximum time, then you have no information. This is kind of like when you are a baby. You have your entire life ahead of you, but you know nothing. And when you have maximum information, there is no time. This is like the moment before you expire, when you are this old person with all of this knowledge, but no time left to use it. This is what maximum entropy literally means. It is to have no more useful energy, or in other words, there is no information left to be processed. But the real paradox here is that even though entropy technically means that, there are less and less things happening. From our perspective, it appears as if more things are happening. A simple example of this is life itself. A lot of people like to argue that life is able to break the laws of thermodynamics because it's able to maintain order in the face of entropy. However, this isn't entirely true. The way that life gets around this is by reproduction, by multiplying. Whenever you see bacteria or cells exponentially multiplying, that is entropy in action. But from our perspective, it looks like more things are happening. It looks like more patterns, more connections and relationships. We even see this with the whole many worlds hypothesis. All of these different branching timelines, that is entropy. This situation would be something akin to more and more events occurring. It would be more things happening in a smaller unit of time. But this will ultimately mean that time is moving faster and faster because more and more things are happening. And I think that we all experience this. As you get older, the years just fly by. When you're a kid, an hour in after-school detention felt like a prison sentence, but when you're older, you can do that with your hands tied behind your back, because time and intelligence have this inverse relationship. But it isn't like it's linear, it's exponential. The older that you get, the faster time appears to flow. And I don't think that this is coincidental. It's as I mentioned, memory is some kind of force akin to gravity. It is a pulling force. Memory is what makes knowledge possible, as I mentioned earlier. And this knowledge is accumulating. It is being sucked towards the attractor. It is being crunched down on top of each other. And from the other side of the coin, from the other perspective, from our perspective, it looks like it's expanding. It looks like we are learning more, figuring more things out, but we are more so being buried. We are being sucked inside of something. And if outer space is inner space, we don't have to look very far to see our fate. Well, technically it is very far, but we see within physics and astronomy the way that gravity works. Once gravity becomes so dense, you have enough mass that is restricted to this small enough space, something very odd happens. Things accumulate until there is a rupture of plane, and then everything goes dark. No one knows what happens after that. At least that's where the science ends on the subject. But as I mentioned, many of our previous intuitions are only being confirmed today with modern day techniques, and it leads me to believe that there may be all kinds of things still left on the table. The same people who are able to correctly intuit how this all began, they also foretold the way that it ends, and they all include this sort of rupture of plane at the end, this twist ending. And if you look to the science, you don't even have to guess. We can clearly see this rupture of plane that lies at the end of time, at the entropic heat death of the universe. The only thing that will be left are black holes. However, this is so far in the future, people tend to not even think about it. But I think that it may be closer than we all suspect. On paper, it's some kind of ridiculous amount of years in the distant future, but in the perspective of some kind of observer, it may be closer than it appears. Sort of like when you were a child, you thought that you were going to live forever until you turned 50 and you see that the clock is ticking. Something is coming for you. It's coming for all of us. But one thing that I have become certain of is that it isn't what you think that it is. It isn't anything to fear at all. Somehow going to sleep is the same thing as waking up. Forgetting and remembering are two sides of the same coin. They are almost like these quarreling brothers. There's that archetype again. But I have to end this video here because if I don't, then this video will be too long and then my editing software will go crazy. However, this isn't the end of this video. This consciousness turning inside out, this rupture of plane, isn't what you probably think that it is. And if you have the proper eyes to see, you can see that it unfolds in these stages. There are these stages, kind of like the stages of pregnancy or childbirth. And I think that this rupture of plane has something to do with the imagination. The imagination appears to literally connect all of the dots. So I'm going to record another video directly after this one and put it on the members platform so we can discuss it further over there. Also on the locals platform, you can post, you can chat with me, and we can support each other on this journey. So consider these avenues. And until next time, y'all have a blessed day.